So the iPod is one of those devices that people are still buying, and I've done plenty of videos talking about the iPod and its features and how to get it to work properly with your computer, but there still seems to be issues that come up that I sometimes forget to even mention. So in this video, I want to talk about a few more things that you need to look out for when you're getting your iPod. Now, I recently saw a comment on one of my videos talking about they got an iPod 2nd generation and it just wasn't working with their computer. Unfortunately, the 2nd generation iPod uses a FireWire cable in order to connect to the computer, which new computers just don't have that. The user, I believe, was using just a regular 30-pin cable, which you can connect to that iPod, but unfortunately it's not going to work in order to sync music and to go ahead and charge it as well. Just because it plugs in doesn't mean it's going to work. So unfortunately, new computers don't have FireWire, and in order to use that iPod, you need to find an older computer that has that option, which might be a little bit too much for some people. So keep that in mind when you're getting iPods. I know people always want to go for the 1st generation or 2nd generation of the iPod just because it's the oldest. But honestly, if you are going to get an iPod, go with the 5th generation or higher, or any of the nanos. Those are going to be fine, except the long one, because that one seems to have a really bad battery issue. But if you are in the market for an iPod, try and stick with the iPod 5th generation or the 6th or 7th classics. Those are going to be the ones that are going to give you the least amount of trouble when you're trying to use it. Another issue I see that people get is when they get their iPod from eBay or wherever they're buying it from, sometimes it doesn't come with a cable. So the 30-pin cable is the kind that you need to use for your iPod. However, you need to make sure that that cable is charge and sync. If it's just a charging cable, all you're going to be able to do is charge your iPod. You're going to need to go on Amazon, that's where I usually get mine, and there'll be on there that it says charge and sync. So you want to make sure that that's the option that you're getting. Otherwise, you'll just run into problems where sometimes your computer won't detect the iPod. And try and avoid the really cheap ones, because those, again, are just not going to work for what you need. So keep that in mind when you are buying your cables on Amazon. Another common thing is people get an iPod and it already has music on there, either from whoever they bought it from, they didn't reset it or restore it to factory settings, and you're trying to add music to it, but you just can't when you connect it to your computer. You have the right cable, your computer is detecting the iPod, but for some reason, you can't put music on there. Now, this part applies to even if you are factory resetting the iPod and are going to add music for the first time, or you are trying to add existing music on there. When your iPod is connected to iTunes, you need to make sure to check the box that says to manually manage music. If you don't check this box, it's going to rely on a syncing feature that just honestly is not reliable, so I always set it to manually manage music. This way you can drag and drop songs into the iPod to your heart's content whenever you want. If you add a new album to your iTunes, you can go ahead and drag it over to the iPod when it's connected without having to go through the whole syncing process that iTunes tries to do when you connect an iPod. So if that checkbox is not checked, you're not going to be able to just drag songs over to iTunes, because it just won't work because you don't have it set to manually manage music. So it is very important to check that box. Otherwise, you're just not going to get it to work. I also see the common issue where people had an iPod that it was stored away forever. Like me, for example, this was stored away in a storage container that I had before I started to actively use it again. And I tried to connect it to my computer and add music to it, but unfortunately with iPods, they can only sync and connect to one computer or one iTunes library. So the problem will happen is that if you had an iPod with a bunch of music from 2006 that you want to keep on there, but you also want to add new music, well, unfortunately, the only way to do that is to factory reset the iPod and then have it sync with the new iTunes library they're going to be using. Now, the problem with that is you're going to lose all of the songs that you have on the iPod. And of course, sometimes we don't want to do that. We want to maintain all of that music. So how can you pull music off of this back onto your computer and then add it again once you've reset it? So unfortunately, iTunes and Apple Music do not have the option for you to extract music off of an iPod and then store it for later use. You're going to have to look for some third-party apps online. There's a bunch of them that I've seen. iMazing is one of them, Touch Copy, CopyTrans, but I think most of those are paid. So keep that in mind. If you are going to be doing that, you might have to pay for some third-party app in order to get all of the music off of your iPod, which is a bummer, but if you want to retain all that music, then you definitely are going to have to do that. So for now, those are the only things I can really think of Charging and sync cable, make sure you have that. Make sure you have manually managed music set up in iTunes, and that you are using an iPod that does not require FireWire in order for it to be working with your computer and stuff. So keep all of that in mind when you are looking for an iPod. And just know that, unfortunately, these devices are old, and the devices that we're using to connect them to are much newer, which almost were never really meant to connect to these. So you will run into those problems. You're going to run into issues sometimes where the iPod is just not being detected by the computer at all. Look into how to factory reset the iPod back to factory settings. Make sure to install the version of iTunes for Windows that I have in the description. If you try and get the newest version, you're going to run into issues, so use the version that I have in the link. Even if you have iTunes already installed, uninstall it. Your music library will stay on there when you install the version I have. That's the one that has always worked for me and does not cause any problems whatsoever. So keep all of that in mind, guys, with getting your iPod. No, it's not an easy journey. It's not like on your iPhones and stuff where you can just open up Spotify, listen to music when you want. You have to put in the work if you want to use an iPod. It's not for everyone. Yes, it's a nice thing to have. You see a lot of people getting the iPod and saying how cool it is, but there's a lot that goes into making sure that you get this working in this day and age. I didn't even get into talking about mods and all that kind of stuff. That's a whole nother video. But just keep all of this in mind if you are going to go out and get an iPod, because you don't want to spend $80 or $100 on one of these things only for it to give you a headache, and you're just going to end up putting it in a box somewhere. So keep all of that in mind, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any more questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. You can also join my Discord channel where I have an iPod channel on there. We can go ahead and talk about iPods if you have further questions. That kind of stuff. All of that will be great for you to use. If you need to contact me, we can chat on there for sure. Make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take it easy. Bye-bye.